The screen flickers to life, and there I am, not the me I remember, not the version of myself that wakes up every morning, stares into the bathroom mirror, and recognizes the face staring back. No, this is something else, a ghost, a confession, a lie that shouldn't exist. The footage is grainy, distorted by time and corrupted data, but the details are unmistakable. The way my fingers tap twice against the table before speaking, a nervous habit I've had since childhood. The slight hesitation before certain words, the way my voice drops when I'm lying. Except I'm not lying in this video. That's the problem. Every syllable, every pause, every flicker of guilt in my expression is real. And yet I've never sat in that sterile, windowless room, never faced the ethics board, never admitted to the things the man on the screen is confessing. But he is me. The project was supposed to be revolutionary, emotional modulation, rewiring the human psyche to dampen trauma, to smooth out the jagged edges of grief and rage. We called it a mercy, a way to unshackle people from their own suffering. But the man in the video speaks in cold, clinical terms about the lines we crossed, the parameters we falsify. The subjects who were never supposed to experience the long-term effects, but did. His voice doesn't waver as he describes the cost of our ambition. And then the final blow, a date stamp, signature, my handwriting, my name. The file was created 2 weeks before I was even granted clearance to access those records. I should have deleted it, burned the drive, pretended I never saw it. But the truth is I couldn't look away, because the most terrifying part wasn't the confession, it was the way the man on the screen looked at the camera in the final seconds. Not with regret, not with shame, with relief, as if he'd been waiting for this moment for a long, long time. The air in my apartment feels heavier now, the walls press closer. I keep replaying the footage, searching for a flaw, a glitch, anything to prove it's a fabrication. But the more I watch, the more I realize the only thing out of place here is me. The version of myself sitting in this room, staring at a screen, is the anomaly. The man in the video, he's the truth. And if that's the case, then the question isn't whether the footage is real, it's whether I'm the one who's been fabricated. Somewhere in the silence, a clock ticks. The sound is too loud, too deliberate, like it's counting down to something. I close the file, the screen goes black, but the reflection staring back at me isn't mine anymore. It's his, the man who confessed, the man who knew what we'd done, the man I'm supposed to become. And so I start writing, not to explain, not to justify, but to trace the edges of this nightmare before it swallows me whole. Because if I don't, I might wake up one day and realize I've already given that interview, that I've already signed my name, that the confession was never a recording, it was a prophecy. And by then, it'll be too late to ask the only question that matters. Who else have we become without realizing it? The screen flickers to life, and there I am, not the version of me that exists in mirrors or memories, not the one who stumbles through mornings with half-remembered dreams clinging to his eyelids. No, this is something else, a perfect, impossible counterfeit. My face, my voice, the way my fingers tap twice against the table when I'm lying. Every detail is mine, but the words coming out of my mouth, they belong to a stranger. The footage is grainy, washed out in that clinical blue of old security tapes. The timestamp in the corner reads March 14th, 2042. a date that shouldn't exist. Not for this, the room is sparse white walls, the steel table, a chair that looks like it was bolted to the floor. I've never been there, never sat in that chair, never leaned forward, elbows on the table, and confessed to things I didn't know I'd done. The emotional modulation trials were compromised from phase 3 onward. My voice is steady, detached. The tone of a man reciting a grocery list, not dismantling his life's work. We adjusted the suppression thresholds beyond safety parameters. The subject's long-term stability was collateral. I watch my own lips form the words, watch my own hand splay open, a gesture I make when I'm trying to seem transparent. The footage stutters corrupted data, glitches eating half seconds of time, but the meaning is clear. I'm admitting to something monstrous, and worse, I sound like I believe it. The video cuts abruptly. The last frame is a signature slashed in my handwriting across the bottom of the screen. The date beside it is impossible. It's from before I had clearance. Before I even knew the project's real name, I closed the laptop. The silence in my apartment is suddenly too thick, too heavy. The walls feel like they're breathing, because here's the thing about guilt. It doesn't need facts to take root. It slithers into the gaps between what you know and what you fear. And right now, staring at my own reflection in the dark screen, I can't shake the question clawing up my throat. What if I did it? Not the me sitting here now, pulse hammering, sweat cooling on my palms, but some other version, a shadow self, who walked into that white room and signed his name on a lie. Or worse, a truth I've somehow forgotten. I should report this, delete it, burn the whole thing down. But my fingers hover over the keyboard, itching to press play again, because if that man on the tape is really me, then who the hell am I? The answer, when it comes, isn't in the footage. It's in the silence after, the way my breath hitches just before the screen goes black, the way my hands shake when I reach for the whiskey bottle. Small tells. Human cracks in the armor. The man in the tape was flawless, calm, certain. I've never been any of those things. Maybe that's the real confession, not the words on the screen, but the terror in the spaces between them. The unshakable dread that we're all just one erupted file away from becoming strangers to ourselves. The laptop hums. The video waits, and somewhere in a room that doesn't exist, another version of me is still talking. The screen flickered, casting jagged shadows across my face. The man staring back at me wore my skin, spoke with my voice, carried the weight of my guilt, yet I had no memory of him, none at all. The recording wasn't supposed to exist, not just because I'd never sat in that sterile, windowless room, never uttered those damning words, but because the file itself defied time. 2 weeks before I'd even been granted clearance, my own signature had already condemned me. I rewound the footage again. The audio crackled, a distorted whisper beneath the hum of corrupted data. The man me leaned forward, fingers steepled, the eyes hollow. We knew the risks, he said, voice stripped of inflection, but the results were too promising to ignore. So we altered the parameters, buried the outliers. By the time the first subjects destabilized, it was already too late. His words were clinical, detached, as if reciting a grocery list instead of confessing to ruin. A cold knot twisted in my stomach. I recognized the cadence, the slight hesitation before admitting the worst of it. That was how I spoke when lying to myself. The room in the video was unfamiliar gray walls, a single overhead light, a glass of water untouched on the table. No windows, no visible doors. It felt less like an interview room and more like a holding cell. I paused the footage, zoomed in on the reflection in the glass. For a heartbeat, I thought I'd see someone else standing behind him, but there was only darkness. Then the file skipped, a glitch or something worse. The timestamp jumped forward, and suddenly the man on screen was different. Still me, but changed. His posture had collapsed. His hands trembled. "They're not just numbers," he whispered, raw, voice breaking. "You have to understand, we saw them, we spoke to them, and then we erased them anyway." My breath caught. That wasn't just guilt. That was grief. I'd spent years in the lab refining emotional modulation protocols. The theory was sound. Dampen extreme reactions, smooth out psychological turbulence, a tool for healing. But the footage suggested something darker, something deliberate. The video ended abruptly, cutting to black after his signature flashed on screen. The date burned into my retinas. Impossible. I'd been on leave then, recovering from the neural sync trials. I'd signed nothing yet. There it was, my handwriting, my shame. I closed the file, but the silence that followed was worse. The walls of my apartment felt thinner, as if the truth in that recording had eroded something fundamental. I'd built my career on precision, on data, on control. But this was chaos, a version of myself I didn't know. Speaking of sins I hadn't committed yet, the word lodged in my throat. Yet, not because if the file was real, if that future confession existed before the act, then the worst wasn't behind me, it was waiting. I opened the footage one last time, not to analyze, not to doubt, but to memorize the hollowed look in that man's eyes, the resignation, the quiet, crumbling horror of someone who'd already crossed the line and knew there was no way back. The reflection in the glass still showed nothing. But for the first time, I wondered if that was the point. Maybe the room had no doors because the man inside wasn't meant to leave. Maybe the darkness behind him wasn't empty. Maybe it was hungry. I shut my laptop. The screen went black, but the after image lingered, my own face, staring back at me from a future I couldn't outrun. Somewhere, in a room I'd never seen, a version of me was still talking, still confessing, and the worst part, I already believed him. The screen flickered to black, but the image burned behind my eyelids, me, sitting in a room I'd never entered, confessing to sins I didn't remember committing. The timestamp mocked me. 2 weeks before clearance, 2 weeks before I even knew the project's true name. Yet there it was, my signature, my voice, my guilt etched into pixels like a ghost signing its own haunting into existence. I rewound the footage again. The man on screen leaned forward, fingers steepled, clinical detachment lacing every syllable. Subject attrition was inevitable after phase 3. We adjusted the parameters to compensate. My eyes never wavered, no hesitation, just cold surgical admission. The words were foreign, but the rhythm was mine. The way my tongue clicked against my teeth on the T in attrition, the slight rasp when tired, even the way I exhaled before lying. The room in the video was sterile, all white walls and a two-way mirror bleeding shadows. No windows, a place built for secrets. I'd worked in labs, conference rooms, even a bunker once, but never this. Yet my body knew it. On screen, my shoulders relaxed into the chair like it was a second home. Then came the worst part, the confession I couldn't reconcile. We knew the emotional modulation would degrade after 6 months, but the board wanted results, so we repurposed the data. A pause, a sip of water. My own face staring back at me with the calm of a man who'd already made peace with damnation. The subject's instability wasn't a flaw, it was a threshold. I slammed the laptop shut. My apartment was too quiet. The hum of the fridge, the drip of the kitchen faucet suddenly sinister, like they were counting down to something. I'd spent years in neuroscience, threading electrodes through the labyrinth of human emotion. I knew the brain's tricks, false memories, implanted narratives. But this wasn't a glitch. The file's metadata was pristine. The encryption keys matched our internal systems. And the signature. Christ, the signature was alive. Every loop of the J, the slant of the D muscle memory I couldn't fake. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. The way my on-screen double had smiled at the end. Not triumphant, not remorseful, just resigned, like he'd known I'd be watching. Like this was the point all along. I tore through my apartment, digging for proof I wasn't losing my mind. Old notebooks, hard drives, the scribbled-on napkin from the bar where we'd celebrated Phase 1. Nothing contradicted the video, nothing explained it, just gaps, whole weeks smudged out by fatigue or deadlines or something else. Dawn crept in, gray and guilty. I opened the laptop again. This time I noticed what I'd missed. A split-second glitch after the timestamp. A frame, maybe less of something behind the mirror, a silhouette, no, a shape. Jagged, asymmetrical, not human, not machine. Then gone. The coffee in my throat turned to acid. I'd seen that silhouette before. In the lab's restricted wing, in the corners of sleep paralysis, in the flicker of every monitor, right before it crashed. The video wasn't a recording. It was a message, not from another time, but from another me. One who'd already stepped through the mirror. One who knew what came next. And he'd signed his name in my handwriting to make sure I'd follow. We think of guilt as a shadow trailing behind us. But what if it's the opposite? What if it's the light we haven't reached yet, the future consequence that casts its glow backward, staining our present with the sins we haven't committed yet? I never gave that interview, but somewhere, in some room that doesn't exist, I will. And when I do, I'll make sure the next me sees it too. The circle doesn't break. It tightens, the screen flickered to life. And there I was, older, colder, a version of myself I didn't recognize. The room was sterile, the kind of place where secrets go to die under fluorescent lights. My own voice, stripped of warmth, detailed the sins of the project with clinical precision. Our emotional modulation trials crossed ethical boundaries. We falsified data. We ignored the long-term consequences. Each admission was a scalpel, dissecting my career, my morals, my very identity. But the worst part, I had no memory of ever saying these words. The timestamp burned at the corner of the screen. 2 weeks before I'd even been granted clearance. And yet my signature, the same looping scrawl I'd used since college, flashed at the bottom of the frame. I rewound, played it again. The men on screen moved like me, hesitated in the same places I did when lying. His fingers tapped the table in that restless rhythm I'd never been able to shake. Even the way he swallowed before admitting the worst of it, that was me. Every detail perfect, every word a confession I'd never made. I should have deleted it, burned the drive, pretended I'd never seen it. But the truth slithered under my skin, whispering the question I couldn't outrun. If I didn't record this, who did? The office was empty when I broke in. Security had been lax since the layoffs, and my keycard still worked. Another oversight. In a building full of them, the ethics board archives were supposed to be sealed, but the lock clicked open with a nudge. Inside, the air smelled of dust and decaying paper. I traced my fingers along the server racks. There hummed the only sound in the dark. Then I found it. A backup drive labeled EM modulation terminated trials. The file names were corrupted strings of gibberish, except for one. Interview_subject_0. My hands shook as I plugged it in. The video loaded instantly. Same room, same me. But this time the camera angle was wider, revealing a second figure just out of frame, a shadow leaning forward, whispering something. My on-screen self nodded, then spoke again, his voice lower now. The subjects don't remember. That's the point. We wiped them clean after. A cold weight settled in my chest. I'd worked on the modulation project for years. I'd coded the safety protocols myself. But this was something else. Something darker. I fast-forwarded the footage. Jumped glitches, missing segments, then stabilized on a close-up of my face, slick with sweat. It's not just memory suppression, the other me said. It's full overwrite. We're not erasing them. We're replacing them. The screen went black. I spent the next 3 days digging. Old emails, buried server logs, requisition forms for equipment that didn't exist in any official inventory. The deeper I went, the clearer it became. Someone had been running an off-book trial, and I was part of it. The final piece came from a decommissioned lab on the 4th floor. Behind a panel of loose ceiling tiles, I found a stack of handwritten notes. My handwriting, Phase 3 successful, Subject 0 shows no recall of implanted memories. Next step, field testing. The date at the top was 6 months ago, around the time I'd started waking up with nightmares I couldn't explain. The last video was the hardest to watch. It showed me standing in front of a mirror, reciting a script I'd never read. My name is Daniel Voss. I am the lead researcher on the EM modulation project. What I am about to disclose is classified. The reflection in the mirror didn't blink when I did. If you're seeing this, the overwrite failed. They'll come for you. Don't trust your memories. Don't trust anyone. Then, as if sensing the camera, the reflection turned slow, deliberate, and looked straight into the lens. Into me. Run. I left the building at dawn. The city was quiet, the streets slick with rain. I didn't know where to go, didn't know who I was. But one thing was certain. The past wasn't just buried. It had been rewritten, taught, and somewhere out there, another version of me was still following orders. The truth was a ghost, and I was the house it haunted. The screen goes black. Silence swallows the room, thick and suffocating. My reflection glares back at me from the darkened monitor, eyes hollow, lips parted, and a question I can't ask, let alone answer. The footage is gone, but the weight of it lingers like a ghost pressing against my ribs. That was my voice, my face, my confession, and yet None of it belongs to me, or does it? I lean back, the chair groaning under the shift of weight. The date stamp taunts me from the corner of the corrupted file 2 weeks before I ever stepped into that lab, before I ever held a tablet with clearance to even see the project's true scope. The signature at the end of the video is mine, down to the jagged slant of the K I've scribbled since college. But I never wrote it, not there, not then. The air tastes metallic. Fear, or maybe the aftertaste of something worse. Not just about the video, but about the edges of my own mind. How do you reconcile a memory that hasn't happened yet? How do you mourn a sin you haven't committed? I close the laptop. The click of the latch is final, like a coffin sealing shut. Outside, the city hums oblivious, indifferent. Life moves in straight lines for everyone else. For me, the path has coiled back on itself, a snake eating its own tail. I think of the man in the footage, the way my hands trembled just slightly, and describing the side effects we'd buried in the reports. The way the light from the overhead panels cut shadows under his eyes, making him look decades older. That wasn't acting. That wasn't some deep fake glitch. That was exhaustion. That was guilt. And that's what terrifies me most, because guilt isn't a costume you can slip into. It's not a script you read. It's something that grows inside you, roots tangling around your bones until you can't tell where it ends. And you begin. The man in that video carried it like a second skeleton. And if he's me, some future me, some fractured version I haven't met yet, then that means the weight is coming. Or worse, maybe it's already here, and I just haven't noticed. I press my palms into my eyelids until colors burst behind them. There's a name for this, isn't there? The fear of your own mind turning against you, the dread of looking in the mirror one day and finding a stranger who knows all your secrets. We're supposed to be the architects of our choices, the authors of our lives. But what happens when the story starts writing itself? The clock ticks, the night deepens. Somewhere a version of me is sitting in a room I've never seen, confessing to crimes I haven't committed. Or maybe have. Maybe time isn't the straight line we pretend it is. Maybe it's a maze, and we're all just rats sprinting toward the same center, convinced we're choosing the turns I used to believe in cause and effect, in action and consequence. Now I'm not sure which comes first. The laptop taunts me from the desk. One press of a button, and I could watch it again, study the details, the flicker of the overhead lights, the way my future self's throat bobs when he says sacrificed. I could parse it frame by frame, looking for seams, for proof it's a fabrication, but I won't, because the truth isn't in the video. It's in the nausea churning in my gut. It's in the way my hands remember the weight of files I've never held. The truth is a thing you feel long before you understand it. I stand, the room tilts just slightly. Outside, the first hints of dawn bruise the sky. A new day, another chance to pretend the world makes sense. But I know better now. Somewhere, a version of me is signing his name to a lie. Somewhere, a version of me is watching this video for the first time, horror dawning in his eyes. And somewhere, maybe here, maybe now, the line between before and after is thinner than I ever dared imagine. The man in the glass is me. And one day, I'll have to let him out.